Professor David Whitney was actually my professor for a very, very long time ago. And so I'm very, very excited to bring him back on stage to actually chat a little bit about what he's working on.
Thank you very much, Tiffine, for the invitation, and for David and everybody for organizing. It's great to be here. I'm a vision scientist. I study why and how people perceive what they perceive, why vision works the way it does. Not what people perceive, but why they perceive what they perceive. And my lab studies a couple of sides of this coin. One is the limits that human visual system has. What limits us? What capacity constraints do we have? And then the other flip side of that is, where does human visual perception really excel? What is it really good at, uniquely good at? Let me talk a minute about the constraints, if that's okay. I'm going to give you an example, if I can walk over here. I want you to look at this O. Stare at that O. You're using your central part of your visual field, your fovea. Now, as you stare at that O, keep staring at that O, I want you to count 6 letters over with your attention. Keep staring at that O, count 6 letters over with your attention. It's hard. In fact, it's impossible for us. This doesn't seem difficult. You can see that there's letterish stuff there, but everything in your periphery is a jumbled mess. You're staring at that O, trying to count 6 letters over. You can perceive letterishness, right? You know that there are letters there. You even know the word is that's there. But you can't recognize the particular identity of particular objects in the periphery because of something called crowding. Clutter impairs our ability to recognize stuff throughout the visual field. Computer vision doesn't have this problem. We can just throw some more GPUs at it. Parallel processing, massive computational power. That's not a problem for computer vision. So the problem for human perception is that we have billions of bits every second, and the visual system has to compress this information. The compression, turns out, can be very useful, and it leads to something that's astounding in visual perception. The astounding part of visual perception is our ability to infer what's there, what's not there, what should be there, what's missing. This kind of inferential perception is really amazing. This is something that computer visual systems can't do. Can I give you an example, a concrete example? So imagine that you've got an AMR, an autonomous forklift, and it's driving down your warehouse floor. Up ahead is this coffee area where people, like our coffee area here, people are converging because there's a coffee urn that's been put out. Unfortunately, that coffee urn was put in a new place on a different table up at the corner, but people are converging there, they're getting their coffee. There's a non-slip rug that usually sits under the coffee urn. It's not there. It's where it's supposed to be, over in its corner, but under the coffee urn is just polished concrete floor. So people are converging there. There's a guy telling a joke. Ha ha ha. A bunch of people are laughing. Some people are laughing politely. Some people are actually laughing. Other people are reaching in to try to get their coffee. We can infer that the coffee's hot. There's steam coming off of it. It's fresh coffee. We can infer what might happen if the coffee got bumped and spilled on somebody's arm. We could infer that the jostling, the burn, might cause a reflex, might cause a movement, might cause somebody to bump somebody else, and suddenly there's a person slipping and falling into the path of our autonomous forklift. Our autonomous forklift has no knowledge of any of this, knows nothing about any of this. Our autonomous forklift might recognize the carpet, the rug, the non-slip rug, but it doesn't recognize why that non-slip rug is what it is, or why it's where it is, or why the fact that it's not in the correct location is a problem. All of these things are inferential kinds of perceptual processes. You and I do them all the time. It involves inferring the social states of other actors in the scene, their minds, their emotional states, how they interact with each other, how laughter is contagious. All of this leads to just infinite complexity. The number of, we can talk about the high dimensional causal inference that's required, and we can do it, humans can do it. Computer vision can't do this. It fails utterly. The computer visual system is interested in the zeros, or maybe the first order. Is there something in my path? Not what are the possible consequences of affordances that may or may not be present, or the counterfactuals of those affordances not being there, let alone that laughter is contagious and people who are simulating laughing because they want to be polite are less likely to jostle and bump somebody else with coffee in their hands. So this is an astounding ability of the visual system. If you ask a kid to do this, they can do it. If you ask them, can you do this inferential perception task as fast as you can recognize a facial expression, The answer is yes. So you and I can infer all of these complex hidden states just as fast as we can recognize that smiling face. We can also recognize that this smiling face and this smiling face might not be happy people. Who has kids here? Who has seen a school photograph? How many of your kids in those school photographs were actually happy? Now, you know that, but a machine doesn't. A computer vision system doesn't. You need the context. You need to zoom out. When we have this kind of situation, Tiffany and me, we've been up for too long already, but if we have this kind of situation, we have an aperture problem. We're focusing too much on the local. We need the context. Human perception is all about context. Everything is about context. Nothing makes sense without the context. But context is really complicated. So this is a hard problem. It is, I would argue, the hard problem. We've talked about world models already today, but mostly what we're talking about in this room when we mention world model is physical world model. What I'm talking about is a social world model. It's infinitely more complex because it interacts, everybody's social world model could be different, and it interacts with a common physical world model in who knows what kinds of ways. It's much more complicated. So if we had back to our forklift, if we had a forklift with minimal viable social understanding, I mean minimal, just the thinnest layer, maybe that forklift could recognize, aha, there's activity going on up ahead, people doing stuff that is incomprehensible, but maybe it's sufficient in this thin slice to pause, ask a question, do something else. It won't have understanding, but it might be able to pause. So this is basically what my lab does. We are interested in human perception, what's hard for us, and what's remarkable, what's almost magical about the human visual system. These are the two things that we're interested in.
Thank you. So I think you've addressed the first question around what was the hardest challenge in robotic perception. Maybe we can talk a little bit about kind of real life use cases. Maybe let's share an additional example of when we're trying to figure out this kind of context situation, why solving this problem might be useful.
Well, I think it holds for all kinds of scenarios, not just warehouses. And I should mention, I used the warehouse example, but it holds for almost every warehouse. We've mentioned dark warehouses today, but unless the environment completely lacks humans, at every minute of every day, it is a social environment. Everywhere humans are found, even if it's just the tech guys, even if it's just the repair guys, even if it's just the management team showing up once in a while, if it is a human anywhere in this environment, it's a social environment. So when we talk about dark warehouses or dark factories or things like this, we have to be specific that we mean completely human-free. Those are very rare circumstances. This doesn't just apply to the kinds of concerns I'm talking about, the aperture problem, understanding, what does this person really feel? What are they likely to do next? Requires having the context, the background, but this applies to in-home cases, robots in-home, robots in healthcare, in childcare, in elder care, cleaning robots, any kind of situation where there are humans present are going to introduce the need for the social world model. So I think, and it has positive cases too. It's not just speaking to Jeremiah's earlier point about safety, the importance of safety. And I used a safety example. It applies beyond just safety. It applies to natural interactions with robots that don't feel stilted, that don't suffer from the uncanny valley. We're going to need robots that do more than just recognize our facial expression. When we're smiling as robots, we might be seething inside, right?
So let's talk about awareness and uncertainty. So as autonomous systems, we gain more decision-making power. How important is it for robots to have a form of perceptual self-awareness or uncertainty modeling to operate safely and intelligently?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous question. I think it's related to this notion, this hypothesis, and it's just a hypothesis. I'm in the business of being curious. I'm not in the business of building robots. That's you. But my curiosity is, if we had this kind of minimal social understanding, could this forklift, this autonomous forklift, recognize its own uncertainty, have a kind of metacognitive awareness? Now, it's not the kind of metacognitive awareness that you and I have, which is we know how uncertain we are, but it would have some degree of understanding of its own uncertainty and would be able to pause. This is a lot like a kid. Imagine you take your 4-year-old to this factory, you're in the warehouse next to the robot, next to this AMR, and the kid looks down the hallway and sees, oh, there are a whole bunch of people, they're partying. Fun. And the parent says, oh, hold the phone here. There's a little bit of sketchiness going on. It looks a little dicey. It looks a little volatile. Let's pause. And the 4-year-old takes that in, listens, nods, and then learns and generalizes from that. One-shot learning, right? Kids can do this immediately. We don't have computer vision systems that can do this, and we don't have enough data in the universe that's going to be able to train social understanding. We need another approach or other approaches. And one way to think about this is the way that human visual system does it. Rather than brute force, back to this example, look how limited we are. Look how little we're actually aware of. We function fine, or we, for the most part, function fine. And the robots that we interact with, we want to function in a way that's natural for us, which means building in those same kinds of limitations may actually not be so problematic.
Thank you. And then, so I know we have several founders in the room. So we were advising founders that are building embodied AI, whether in healthcare, logistics, or autonomous systems. How could discoveries from vision science be applied to today to make robots more reliable, intuitive, or human aware?
I think some of the things that we've already talked about could be useful. I'm not a founder, unfortunately, but I am curious about the things that could make founders' lives easier and better. And when I reflect on the kinds of robot interactions that one could have, I think that introducing this minimal viable social understanding idea is so difficult. It's actually such a big challenge. It's a lot harder than recognizing deformable materials or folding napkins or folding blankets or picking up strawberries that are sensitive, have sensitive skins. It's much, much harder than that. So just achieving this minimal viable social understanding would be a pretty remarkable achievement, I would think.
Great, and then we're going to wrap up with the last question. As you look to the next decade of perception research, where do you see the most exciting intersections between neuroscience and robotics, and what new capabilities might emerge when machines begin to see the world the way humans do?
I think the sky's the limit. I think the healthcare industry, every vertical you can think of, and you already have. This is where you're curious. This is your bailiwick, more so than mine. But I think every vertical is impacted. Healthcare, education, finance, economics. If we can develop robots that understand us better, they can navigate us better, we can interact with them better in seamless kinds of ways, we could all be better off. Not be too Pollyanna about it, but.
Great, thank you so much.
Thanks.